Back out by Jamie Baker. Yushkevich wheels it back in. Lindros lost. Archibald takes him out of the play. Up with it is Recchi. Walks in front. Shot one, knocked down. Rebound, score! Lindros!
Hey everybody, it's Isaiah, and FLYERS presents the O&B Puckcast, episode number 31, and I am here with my partners, Chef B. How are you, man?
Better than the Flyers.
And also, courtesy of FLYERS.com, Dan the Flyer fan, Dan Ash. How are you, man?
I'm hanging in there, a little sick, but I'll be fine.
Yeah, you're playing hurt tonight, and we have a special. Yeah, we appreciate that. We have a special guest tonight who's a returning guest. We're really happy to have him on board. But before I get into that, just a reminder, the O&B Podcast is featured on 5 podcast platforms. And most important is iTunes. We're also on Stitcher, SoundCloud, TuneIn Radio, Google Podcast. And about 48 hours, we'll be on the FLYSportsNetwork.com YouTube channel. But if you could subscribe to the O&B Podcast on iTunes, that would be appreciated. It really helps the show. And give us a 5-star rating if we've earned it. With that, I want to introduce, returning with us from sonsofpenn.com, let's welcome aboard Tom Foti. Tom, how are you, man?
I'm doing pretty well. I wish the Flyers were sporting a 3 in the win column instead of a 2. But you know what? 5 games into an 82-game season, a lot of time to turn things around.
Yeah, no question about that. The Flyers start the season. They're 2-3 after 5 games. They have a -4 differential, which, considering some of the games, is actually miraculous, considering the way they played. But before we get into that, just want to get some opinion. Tom, I'll start with you. I did almost like a 2 or 3 minute soliloquy last show about how the Flyers absolutely had to go and pick up a goaltender, considering the inexperience, injury record, and everything else that was going on with all of their goaltenders. So they pick up Chet Pickard, who was put on waivers by Toronto. And I wanted Curtis McElhinney, who's actually doing a good job with Carolina right now. But considering the alternatives the Flyers had and the fact that we still think Brian Elliott could be a little fragile coming off 2 surgeries in a row, I was happy about that. I just wanted to get your opinion.
Yeah, it's kind of what you expected after Neuvirth went down and Lyon went down, that Hextall was not going to ride Carter Hart into the season. He was going to let him sit in Lehigh Valley, get some games under his belt with a lot fewer eyes on him and a little bit less pressure. Not that Carter Hart can't handle the pressure, but you kind of get what I'm saying. In his development, I expected Hextall to go up and pick up a goalie on waivers. Pickard, I mean, he looked decent. He looks like a backup, right. But he looks like a guy who you're not worried about when he's going in. And probably more importantly, considering our backup the last few years, a.k.a. Michael Neuvirth, you're not worried if he's going to pull his groin skating from post to post.
Exactly. Yeah, I just felt that they showed a clear-headed approach to this issue, and there was a sense of urgency. Personally, Dan, I would terminate the contract of Michael Neuvirth. I just don't see the point anymore of this kabuki theater with him. What say you?
I mean, there probably is legal reason, I guess, where they could terminate his contract. But my guess, given all the praise Hextall gave him over the offseason, I don't think they're going to get rid of him. He's probably going to be inserted back into the lineup once he gets healthy for, the game or two before he gets hurt again. So, we might see more of him, but I think Pickard, hopefully he gets a couple more starts before they clear Neuwirth to maybe solidify the backup role.
Yeah, I would think, and I'll go on record in saying if Pickard is a guy who looks like a solid backup, which is what they need right now, not a guy like Stoley who only played 4 games last year, which was not really acceptable as a so-called solution there. I think if Pickard shows something, they should waive him for the purposes of terminating his contract. But let me move on to injuries. Chef, the Flyers right out of the gate, game 2, JVR gets hurt, taking a puck to the knee. Next couple of games later, Nolan Patrick has what we don't think is a concussion, but could be a cheekbone injury, a shoulder injury. We're not sure. It's tough to start the season like that.
Yeah, I mean, we're hoping it's a shoulder injury. Usually when in the NHL nowadays, when you get a concussion, they're pretty much, they put you on a day-to-day. They don't want to put a time limit on it. So hopefully this means it could be a shoulder, 7 to 10 days. But the good thing is, people stepped up, and a little bit at least. And one of those people stepped up greatly, and I think you tweeted it out, was Scott Lawton. I mean, he's just playing awesome. So, we're going to find out how in depth, how much these prospects that we have all, in the minors are, how valuable they're going to be, really.
Yeah, we'll actually later we are going to talk a little bit about the Phantoms, what has been going on, and how that impacts the Flyers. But Tom, the Flyers did dodge some bullets with Travis Konechny, with Oscar Lindblom, and also with Scott Lawton, who went heavy in the boards in the last game versus the Vegas Golden Knights. So it hasn't been all negative karma on the injury front.
No, and I was amazed when I saw the report, and from one of the beat reporters who said that Lawton was back on the bench, and then sure enough, the camera went right to him, and I was amazed. I was truly amazed that Lawton came back in that game, because the way that he went into the boards, especially going shoulder first, and I don't know, maybe it was the angle that I saw. I saw some whiplash. Maybe his head had gone into the boards, but it was not a good hit. He went full speed into that, and it reminded me of a couple years ago against the Capitals in the playoffs when Lawton had to be stretchered off. That was really concerning to me, but thankfully Lawton's okay, Konechny's okay, and Lindblom, they're all okay. So, I mean, the Flyers can really – they really needed a break on the injury front, and thankfully those 3 guys, it was nothing but hopefully just a couple bumps and bruises for them.
Yeah, and I got to give Oscar Lindblom a lot of credit. He was smashed into the glass by Braden McNabb in the last game versus the Golden Knights, and he took some of the blame for putting himself in a situation where he didn't protect himself enough. He didn't act like, oh, woe is me. And fortunately, like we said, he's okay. And we move on. We'll see how he looks tomorrow when they play at home against the Panthers. But, gents, let's get into the action. Opening night, Flyers are in Las Vegas, play the Golden Knights for the first time. And after that first 10 minutes, Dan, it pretty much was the Flyers playing their game and skating away with a 5-2 victory.
Yeah, I think overall they played a very good game against Vegas the first time. There were some early cracks in the foundation, but, once the power play got going and scored a couple of those goals, they were able to put the Knights away.
Yeah, absolutely. Simmons had a big night. We were so worried about Elliott. Even though he looked good in the exhibition game, it's not like NHL action. With some other players, we've seen that in effect, no doubt. But Elliott was solid that night. Yeah, so it was a good victory. It was a little bit of a surprise. I didn't expect them to get that one. Chef, one thing that's come up, I've noticed that we're going to get into hack a little bit later, but that night they had a lot of problems with line changes. And that seems to be something that is a consistent issue with the team.
Yeah. I mean, you can't have that stuff going on at this level now. I mean, especially this early in the season, to be showing all your woes like so predominantly like this. They need to do something, and they need to do something fast about that. How many bench minors they have for too many men? I think, what are we pushing, 3 now? So, I mean, usually, you don't get these these problems popping up, and I really want them to fix this ASAP.
Yeah, that's something that's not acceptable. That's on the coach. He's got to fix it. But Tom, we go into Colorado, and they lose a game 5-2, and they seem to have trouble with the Avalanche's speed all night. Very poor puck management. And I think the one thing, Elliott was outstanding in that game, but one thing that really stuck in the craw of a lot of Flyers fans was why Christian Folin, and sure enough, he's implicated in at least 2 of the goals in a game that was 4-2 until an empty netter at the very end.
Yeah, I mean, actually, I missed this game. I caught the highlights when I got back. I was up in Lehigh Valley for Carter Hart's first game, so I got to see Carter Hart in action. But from what I watched, Folin he looked like a guy who had never played in the NHL before. He looked lost. And, I mean, it's only appropriate that the guy he was taking out, Radko Gudas, he had a good game against Vegas, and then all of a sudden he's out of the lineup. Whether or not Hacksaw had planned to put Folin in, regardless of how good of a game Gudas had or how good of a game anyone had, it's still, I'm not going to lie, it's perplexing to me. And this is coming. If anyone follows me, I've been one of, I want to say a Hack supporter, but I'll say a defender, that he's not as terrible as a lot of people make him out to be. I think he's an average coach with some big flaws, but at the end of the day, I think he's an average coach who needs to work on those flaws. But it was really, going back to Folin, I just didn't get the move. And the fact that he was responsible for some of those goals doesn't make Hacksaw look any better, neither Folin either.
No, it rubs salt in the wound. I think the issue is, I think if you move players in and out of the lineup, on the periphery of the lineup, the 12th forward, the 6th defenseman, which I don't consider Gudas to be, no. I think it's okay. But when you have this delicate balance, you're trying to find that steady partner for somebody like Travis Sanheim, who's a real important player for them this year. He's got to take that next step. Why mess with that chemistry to let, a guy like Folin in? It's not like Folin had really shown anything, even in the exhibition games.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, it would be a different story if Folin looked like a solid number 7 guy in the preseason, but he looked anything but solid as a number 7 in the preseason. So, I mean, it's, in the grand scheme of it all, it's one game. But one of the things that a lot of people went back to last year was the Nashville game that Hacksaw, he pretty much gave it away with that challenge that he had that ended up costing the Flyers at least a point. And we've seen it from every single year with the past couple of years when the Flyers are in the hunt for the playoffs. They have made it on the last day of the season. And, I hate to pin it all on one game because it's an 82-game season. There's lost opportunities here and there and everywhere. But it's tough to look past some of those games where you go, you had that one in the bag, or you know what, maybe if you hadn't done that, we walk out of Colorado with 2 points. Or maybe, you know what, we walk out of there with 1 point. But it shows at the end of the year, every single game, every single point does matter. You try not to get too hung up on the highs or the lows over the course of that 82-game season. But the things you can control, you try to control as best as you can. And Folin going into that lineup, it was something that was controllable. And I'm stealing your phrase right here. It was salt in the wound when that loss got put up on the board, that Folin was a major part of it. But in the overall scheme, he wasn't the only reason they lost. He was a reason, but not the reason that they lost.
No, but like piggyback on what you're saying, it's a self-inflicted wound, just like in Nashville last year when playing a non-conference opponent, you had a point in the bag, and I don't want to rehash that. But again, he gets caught in a moment, and he just kind of freezes up or just sticks with some plan that doesn't make sense. One highlight of that game, Dan, was Misha Vorobiev getting his first goal. The Avalanche go all Keystone Cop and run into each other. He's there. He's got a gaping net, and he pops it home.
Yeah, it was good for Vorobiev. He really hasn't been all that noticeable since the regular season started, but, it's good that he does have that first point, that it's not going to linger for him for the foreseeable future. So it's good that he got it early, and hopefully he can refine that fire in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, he hasn't been that noticeable. That's correct. His underlying numbers are good, and I hope that they're patient with him. A lot of people today on Twitter were finding that Corbin Knight was out skating again and anticipating the doom. Chef, Corbin Knight, oh no, he's a center. He's going to come in for Vorobiev if Vorobiev isn't more noticeable. One good thing, though, is that Knight seemed to be skating as a winger in the warm-up drills today.
Yeah, you know what? And I'm not really worried because I just think at any point, he's going to bring – if he comes in, I don't think that anybody of significance will be knocked out, but you never know with Hack. But at least, he'll bring that fire that he had all through preseason and camp. So hopefully, he gets if he comes back, he gets a long look.
Yeah, I thought that Knight was a guy who I'd rather see on the ice for the most part than a guy like Dale Weiss or Yuri Laterra. Let's give Laterra credit. He's played fairly well. His numbers are good with regard to driving play relative to what the expectations are. So I can't give a dissertation on that guy. We had so much fun at his expense last show. I'll just move along. But yeah, Tom, what can you say about the 8-2 disaster at home opener versus the Sharks, where again Hack is under the microscope for not calling a timeout, pulling Elliott. He had a plan to put Pickard in the next game, but he didn't really balance that, I don't think, the way he could have.
No, you go back and you look at that game, and it was the Murphy's Law illustrated in a hockey game. Everything that could have gone wrong for the Flyers went wrong. And after that second goal, I'll say it. I mean, Hack probably should have called a timeout. I get that you're on a back-to-back. You're in a tough spot with your goalies. But after that second, third goal, probably the second one, I mean, you got to call a timeout, settle everyone down and say, all right, look, we're down in a hole early here. Settle yourselves down. Let's get one, work our way back into this game. Don't try to do anything simple. Because prior to that first goal, everything was going great for them. They had a bunch of chances, and then it was reminiscent of teams of yesteryear. They made one mistake. They were controlling play, and then that one mistake ends up in the back of their net, and then it was just a steep fall down to the bottom. And it's a game you definitely want to forget about. And unfortunately, it wasn't mixed into the schedule in December. It was the home opener. So that one's gonna resonate and stick around for a long, long time.
Yeah, you want to turn the page on that, but things that made an impression on me was Elliott might have been their best player that night, but he didn't get off to a very good start. A couple of those goals were not good, especially in the beginning. Then he was starting being very erratic and gave up bad rebounds, which set up some really spectacular saves afterwards, but they gave up an incredible amount of shots. Keith Jones kept talking about how the Flyers, Dan, they couldn't control their speed through the neutral zone. It reminded me a little bit of what happened versus the Avalanche, but on steroids. And after there was a point in the game where it was 3-0, and they had a power play, and that was really their last chance to get back into the game. They couldn't cash in on that, and I think it was Evander Kane scores the power play goal, and that was it. From there on in, it was just a very forgettable game.
Yeah, it wasn't the best showing in the world, and I was had the pleasure of covering that game, and I was not very thrilled by the end of it. And being the home opener, especially, it was a hard pill to swallow. But it was pretty much a failure on all parts. They had the chances early on, and then San Jose took over and never looked back, and they had 2 goals in 11 seconds, I believe, and Hack never called a timeout, which is a specialty of not making any moves like that. But, San Jose, they were a team that was expected to be good, and they weren't coming before that game. And then by the time they got to Philadelphia, they got shut up by the Islanders the night before. I feel like they had something to prove, and they came out and put their offense on display.
Yeah. Tom, I want to stop right here and talk about Dave Haxtell.
Oh, boy.
I get a palpable sense that he doesn't have as much rope this year. When the Flyers make a move like picking up JVR, and it seems to be very clear the Flyers expect to not only make the playoffs, but at least win a round. And we've already pointed out some things that he did in this game, in the last couple games, that people have a right to be upset about. How much rope do you think he has?
I think that Hextall allows him, unless barring a disaster, and I'll put a face to that. I would say if the Flyers lose 10 in a row, or if they have an extended losing streak and they're just not playing well, I think Hextall is definitely probably telling Hack, look, that JVR signing, it's go time. All right, we're not here to fart around anymore. It's time to make some noise, win around in the playoffs, and we're done with this making the playoffs and being one and done and being happy that we got there with the roster that we got. And that's at least what the JVR signing said to me. And I don't know, maybe this is just purely speculation. I've noticed that Dave Haxtell is a lot more animated on the bench this year than he has in his previous 2 years. Last year, he was definitely a lot more emotional than I had seen him before. His first year, he just looked like a sculpture. I don't even think he cracked a smile behind the bench. The year after, his second or third year, he started showing a little bit more emotion, get a little bit more animated at the refs, yelling down the bench a little bit more. This year, I can pick out several times a game where I've seen him get riled up. So maybe that's a product of him changing his coaching style a little bit more. Maybe it's him feeling the seat under him a little bit more. Again, it's speculation, but I definitely think that if the Flyers fail to make the playoffs this year, or if they make the playoffs and get embarrassed again like they did in the Pittsburgh series and fail to win a round and get blown out of their own arena, then Hextall might be forced to make a change there, because you only got so many years left of Claude Giroux's prime in his productive years. And he's probably thinking about that right now. Hextall's probably thinking that I only got so much time left with Claude Giroux. I need to make a move here if Hextall doesn't deliver this year.
Yeah, I see it that way too. I have a sense that Haxtell has to know that it is go time, like you said. And Schiff, I think it's fair enough. We pointed out when the Flyers are going through that losing streak last year that from the winning streak the prior year through that losing streak, the subsequent season, they were playing sub 400 hockey. That's a whole season of sub 400 hockey. Then they picked themselves up. To their credit, they have been resilient under Haxtell. But Chef, I think it is coming to a point where Hextall, if he doesn't start seeing some improvement in some things, and of course it's way early, but at the 20-game mark, for me, is when we're really going to look back and say, okay, season's a quarter over. What's going on here? What do you think?
Yeah, I actually don't think it'll get to, hopefully, in my mind, I'm not thinking it's going to get to that point. I think that, this team is resilient. They have enough prospects to fill in the gaps here and there when these freak stretch of injuries come up. I just think you're right. You're both right. I think he's on a short leash, but I don't think it's going to be a huge swing like we saw last year with a 10-game losing streak and then come back. And I think this team is a little more resilient. I think they're a little more, I want to say more of a gel of a team than they were last year. The new faces have settled in, and I just think that it doesn't get to that point where you're sitting there wondering what the identity of the team is. I think they have their identity this year.
Well, I hope so. I know versus the Sharks and at times versus Colorado, they look like they did versus Pittsburgh. Shell-shocked, kind of feeling like they're overwhelmed and maybe don't belong on the same ice. And I don't want to see that team anymore. I know it's going to happen from time to time, but I'm a little disappointed with some performances, which, Dan, that brings me to the Ottawa game. So now the Flyers are a desperate team. The night before, the Sharks were desperate. They had not won a game on their road trip. We're going to see that again with Florida tomorrow night. But just going back to the Ottawa game, the Flyers win a sloppy one. They had to really show up. And finally, I think Giroux and Voracek, in particular with 5-point night, showed up. Pickard looked like a backup but competent. And they came away with a really badly needed victory.
Yeah, it was one of those in-game shootouts that happened that game. It was a rough one. I think they got dominated on the power play. It was 3 for 7 for Ottawa, but frankly, they did not look good. The Flyers' power play really has been clicking all season, but there's been a lot of smoke, but no fire. They've been pushing. They had 7 chances versus Ottawa as well, and they only registered 2. But, it's one of those games that they needed that kind of offensive breakout after a relatively slow start to the season. But I think that moving forward, they need that kind of offense more often. And I don't, this team is built to score, and it's not necessarily a defensive-minded team. This is a team that should be scoring 4 or 5 goals every night. So they need to kind of keep that up, because I don't think this defense or goaltending is going to be able to bail them out every single night.
No, especially not. And Tom, we should stop there. There is a team-wide issue with defense. There's no doubt, but their defensemen, particularly Amac and Provorov, playing below par, they got to pick it up here. Do you think that Amac said he came back too soon from his injury? It sure shows. He looks pretty wretched out there, to be frank.
He does. I don't know what made McDonald decide to come back. Maybe he was feeling the heat of Phil Myers preseason and felt like his roster spot may be in jeopardy. That's speculation, but maybe he just felt the need to come back earlier, which he probably should have taken a page out of Brian Elliott's book and not have come back sooner than he should have. With Elliott, he came back early because the team was in the playoff hunt, and they needed him. Neuvert was hurt. Mrazek couldn't stop a beach ball. Elliott was really their only chance of possibly getting out of the first round against Pittsburgh, and his play clearly in the playoffs, at least, it showed that he came back too early. With Provorov, I think McDonald, you have that certain expectation. All right, Amac is Amac. With Provorov, it's different. I don't know if he's feeling the heat in a contract year. I can't imagine he is, but I think it's worth putting it out there at least. But he's just not making the same subtle plays and the same poise that we're used to seeing from Ivan Provorov. Maybe he's overthinking stuff out there and thinking that he's got to be the horse and he's got to do everything to carry the team. We'll never truly know what is going on. Maybe he's just in a funk and he's got to snap himself out of it. But if this team is going to start making noise, as I had mentioned earlier, Provorov's going to have to be the leader on that back end. As much as Ghost is the offensive dynamo, Provorov is the lead horse on that blue line.
Yeah, if he's not the guy, they're really in trouble. It was interesting. I was reading an article by Brad Keffer up at Broad Street Hockey, and he was talking about how strange it was versus the Avalanche, where Provi and Ghost did very well against the first line, but were essentially owned the rest of the night by the other players on the Avalanche. So funk might be the right word to describe what's going on with Ivan Provorov. He doesn't look comfortable handling the puck. and he's falling down a lot. So he's might be nerves, like you said. I'm not really sure. Hopefully it's a first 5 games to work it out, and we'll forget about this. Because I know Provy at times last year went through kind of a funky thing. He was trying to push plays that weren't there, produce more offense. It didn't look his usual self, and then, of course, he got back to it. That's something that bears watching. Dan, it hasn't all been negative. There have been some players, and we mentioned Laterra earlier, but particularly Michael Raffle and especially Scott Lawton have performed above expectations, and maybe after all this time, a 2012 draftee, Scott Lawton is starting to fulfill his potential and look like a top 9 level player.
Yeah, there isn't, besides Andrew McDonald, there really isn't anybody single-handedly on the team that's playing really bad right now. And, Scott Lawton has been, finally kind of breaking out. I've been a fan of his basically since the beginning. So it's really nice to see him kind of come out of that shell. For whatever reason, I don't think he ever felt comfortable at the NHL level, but, he's going out there and he's playing well this year. And Michael Raffle, who's always been a very solid player, is coming out and he's looking even better than he usually does. And together they are enough to carry Laterra to a good game as well. So, I like that fourth line. I think that they are going to probably stay together for most of the season, barring any injuries. I know Lawton was moved up a line in-game during the Vegas, during Hack, trying to shuffle some of the lines. But overall, I think that might be a solid line. And as long as Lawton can continue his solid season, he can provide that depth scoring that they really need, and he can carry Laterra to a point where he's not going to weigh the team down. Yeah,
hopefully that's the case. Laterra has his part of the ice that he is okay at. He's heavy along the boards. He doesn't really have as heavy a stick as you would imagine, but we know very well about Yuri Laterra. But Lawton has been a standout. Shep, there is one player I'd have to disagree with Dan that I have been disappointed in. He hadn't played well during the exhibition season, and until he got hurt versus Ottawa. Nolan Patrick just looks like he too has been in a bit of a funk.
I'm going to agree with you, Derek. I saw one of the games. I think I'm going tomorrow. I wouldn't say disappoint. I would just say it wasn't playing well. I would say just flat. It seems like he's missing his champ. I don't want to say his hustle isn't there, but he just seems to be out of place. Maybe he's missing his assignments or missing some other stuff, but he just seems to be out of place. I can't put my finger on it, but that's what I would have to say. But I do agree with that.
In a funk, like Tom, I just like Provy. In a funk, they don't look like themselves. They don't look like the guys that were playing the way they were at the level right before the playoffs last year.
No, they don't. It's something you might think maybe they're overthinking, and maybe that JVR signing resonated with everyone else that it's go time, and maybe some of them are just overthinking and they're trying to force plays that aren't there, and they're not sticking to their game. It's one of the cliches. In football and every single sport, do your job. Don't try to be the hero. Don't try to make things happen all by yourself. Do what you do best. Everything else will fall into place. If everyone does what they're supposed to do, you'll start seeing the results. If for Patrick, if his line mates are doing what they're supposed to be doing, everyone's going to start clicking. And maybe that could be it. Maybe guys are overthinking, and maybe they're trying to be the hero and trying to force plays instead of just sticking to what works for them and trusting in their skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a couple guys on the team that are in that circumstance. Until that Ottawa game, I felt that Jake Voracek was in that category. Dan, he breaks out with a 5-point night, but his puck management over the season, again, can really be frustrating, and there's all kinds of other words I could say.
Yeah, Voracek has never been very consistent with his puck management. I brought it up on Twitter from time to time, and I get absolutely torn apart by people that, for some reason, really love Jake Voracek. And he does when he's on, he produces offense. We saw it versus Ottawa. When he feels like it, he can really go out there and do it. But there are nights when he really is more harm than good. And as can kind of get that together, which we've seen off and on already this season, I think he can be valuable. But, moving forward, he really needs to start playing with some kind of consistency when it comes to puck handling.
Yeah, he's got that cross-ice pass disease he got from Scott Hartnell left it behind, and it's really infuriating. And all I can tell you, Chef, when it comes to Jake Voracek, don't give me your stats. Let's watch the game together, and I'll ask you, is that a good play? Is that the best play? Or is that a bad play? And too often with Jake, it's a bad play. It's not the right play. You're trying to get blood from a stone. Oh, you can tear your hair out.
He gets bailed out a lot by his teammates. And I don't know. Last year when I looked at his assists, and I made a joke at the end of the season, like towards the end of the season, I said, how the hell did he get so many assists? Oh, are they counting the ones where he gave up the puck at the blue line and the other team scored on him? So yeah. I was thinking along those lines. But yeah, I mean, I count. I mean, how many? I've done it, and I've started counting 3 times last game I saw. And I didn't get to see the game on Saturday, but the Tuesday game I taped the other one and I watched the highlights and all that. But 3 times. I said, oh, come on, Jake, that's just bad. I'm starting to keep track of them. I call it the Jake meter. It's just how many times do I say, Jesus, Jake, you can't be making those kind of like plays.
Yeah. I mean, Jesus, Jake, it's kind of like a collaboration with Jim Jones from Guyana. Drink the Kool-Aid, just look at his stats and tell me he's great. He is a good player. I know he drives play, but Tom, he also drives you crazy.
Voracek, I got to be careful here because I haven't been blocked by Voracek on Twitter yet. So
you're the only one. Huh?
I'm done now.
I keep every now and then, like I go and I look back, just for fun. I'll see, like I'll Google I'll search his Twitter handle on Google and I'll click on his profile and I'm still not blocked. I don't know how, but I have escaped the fray. But yeah. Voracek is definitely a guy who can perplex you from time to time. And I'll admit I'm a Jake Voracek fan, but there are some times where I do look at him and I shake my head. I'm like, come on, man, you're better than that. And well, yeah, he's got great vision on the power play. He's a decent puck handler on the power play. I wish he would change his shot a little bit more. It seems like he just lets the puck go and doesn't change the angle of the shot. But you know what? If you're putting up 85 points last year, he's doing something right. And while you kind of wish his puck management was a little bit better, I mean, it's kind of the same cliche that you hear from a lot of guys who handle the puck a lot. They turn it over. If you look on the Flyers last year, I don't have it in front of me, but I know Claude Giroux was in the top 10 in giveaways. Actually, I got it right here. I'll just list off the top 5 in giveaways for the Flyers. And look who's number 2, Jake Voracek. Ivan Provorov was top among the list with 92 giveaways. Second was Jake Voracek. Third was Shane Gostisbehere. 4, Ratko Gudas. 5, Andrew McDonald. The Sesame Street jingle's going off in my head right now. One of these things is not like the other.
Right,
two of these are not like the other 3. But with Voracek, I've always thought of him with Seattle now coming in to the NHL within the next couple years or so. He's a guy that is in the back of my mind that the Flyers might let him go. They might let Seattle take him, or at least allow, or at least give Seattle the option. They might expose him just because they've already got Drew on an $8+ million deal. Do they want to have Jake in there with the way Konechny and Patrick and Provorov and Gostisbehere and all these other guys that are coming through the system? If they all hit their ceilings, that's a lot of money that's going to have to be allocated to them. You get it's not every day you can clear $8.25 million off your cap. So, I mean, that's still looking down the road, but it's definitely something to consider should the Flyers keep Voracek and not, I don't expect them to trade him, but it's definitely something to consider when/if Seattle does join the league.
Yeah, I agree. I think he's definitely a candidate, along with one of the defensemen in the category of Moran or Haig. Sorry, Dan. Yeah, Dan
he
is
just
the number
started
one.
practicing again. You can't do that to him.
Yeah, listen, you know what? With the way they're letting the Commerce go through the crease, I am ready for Sam Moran to start mashing people. So, Dan, don't get too upset. But getting back to Jake, we'll get to Sam Moran in a moment. Yeah, but the final point is, this is not to bash Jake per se, but we talked earlier about Hackstall and self-inflicted wounds. That is what I consider Jake Voracek to be. If he just was a little smarter in handling the puck and did things simpler, we wouldn't be having this conversation. We know he's productive. He's like a relief pitcher. Every other year he's good, and other years he's still productive, but not what you think he could be. But let's move along. And Dan, they drop the 1-0 game versus the Vegas Golden Knights. I think the Flyers carried most of the play until the third period, and Marc-Andre Fleury just stole the game for the Golden Knights.
Yeah, once that game went 0-0 into the second intermission, I think every single Flyers fan knew how that game was going to go, and that's exactly what happened. They lost in the last 5 seconds of the game after a horrible defensive breakdown. Cody Eakin was all alone, put it past Elliott. It wasn't Elliott's fault, but Fleury made quite a few saves. I think he saved 2 breakouts. He had a huge save in the dying seconds as the Flyers had the goalie pulled. But it was his game. He was on. Certainly a 180 after the Flyers decimated him in Vegas during the season opener. So that's just kind of how karma rolls, I guess.
I agree. I'm not. I wouldn't be Tom. I wouldn't be there like Dave Hackstall and say I wouldn't change a thing or anything like that. I would just say it was more like the way we want to play, but we have to put some pucks in the net. I think Hackstall went a little bit too far, like you were saying earlier. He's a little more animated this year, and maybe he's feeling the heat.
That Vegas game, it really did. It felt like one of those games that they were just going to lose in heartbreaking fashion. And it wasn't like they didn't have chances. They had the chances, but Marc-Andre Fleury's shoulder blade had to get on one piece of the puck and bring it wide and continue to make Travis Konecny snake bitten. If the Flyers can put together that effort against Vegas consistently, they're going to be a great team this year. Sometimes you just got to tip your hat to the other team, and you know what? You beat us. Next time, you're not going to get so lucky. You're not going to be able to rely on your goalie like that the next time we get you guys. Which, you know what? Maybe that'll be in the Stanley Cup final because I know the Flyers are now done with Vegas. But if they want to be a good team this year, that effort against Vegas is exactly what they need.
For the most part, yeah. I was reading Alex Appleyard today, Tom, and he was saying the real strength of Hackstall's team has been their 5-on-5 defensive play, and that's the backbone of what they do. When that's not going right, they're not going to win. So it is good to see them get back to that fundamental, playing the way they have to play most games to meet expectations.
Definitely, and I wish I had the stats in front of me. I didn't think of it until you said that. I also believe the Flyers have increased their 5-on-5 scoring in every year since Hackstall has joined the club. Now, maybe that's a result. It's definitely worth looking into of the 5-on-5 defensive play when the Flyers are going well. 5-on-5 that transitions to better offense. Maybe it's a combination of that and better talent on the roster and more offensively gifted players. But I mean, Alex is definitely on to something. That Hackstall is definitely a more defensive guy. I wish they would push the issue a little more offensively, but I mean, I'm going back to the Vegas game. They played a great defensive game. The offense just couldn't click. Well, I shouldn't say they couldn't click. They couldn't solve Marc-Andre Fleury.
Right. And he likes to. I know if he likes to activate his defensemen and play in 5-man units, But there's something Charlie O'Connor has been harping on, and I saw a stat, and I think maybe our buddy Ted Brown was talking about this too. They lead the league in taking point shots. And the way they generate offense, it's kind of like, when in doubt, let's just go back to the point. And if they could reorient their attack to get into more high quality, high danger area chances, that could be a big breakthrough for them and maybe take them to that next plateau that they're looking to ascend to.
I mean, absolutely. When you got guys like Giroux and guys on your back end, like Sanheim, like Ghost, like Provorov, to a certain extent this year with Robert Haig, when Phil Myers finally makes it to Philadelphia, you got a lot of offensively gifted guys. So maybe that's where Hacksaw is kind of looking toward the future, to have that system already in place and kind of let those offensive guys drive play a little bit. But you still want to see a little more, kind of get behind the goal line a little bit. You don't want to go cross ice passes in the defensive zone because those are just low percentage plays.
Yeah.
But it's definitely something that I have looked at, because I'm thinking there's no way that Dave Hacksaw's thinking, all right, we got to get more point shots where a lot of our guys are already getting their shots blocked. That's what I'm thinking, is that he's trying to put that system in place. So when those offensively gifted defensemen essentially all we're waiting for is Phil Myers. He wants those offensively gifted guys to push the forwards back down. What's the word I'm looking for? The wording I'm looking for. He wants those defending forwards to be pushed down below the circles and below the hash marks to open up a little bit more space for them. It's right. I mean, it's a lot of kind of like, all right, let's see how this works. But also in that same vein, Hacksaw also has to tailor his system to the personnel that he has. If he doesn't have defensemen who can consistently activate down low and be able to generate offense, and forwards who can read what the defensemen are doing, you've got to tailor your system to those guys. I know Hacksaw has made changes, but I don't know enough about systems and pointing out subtleties to say, yes, he is doing that, or no, he isn't.
Right. It just does seem they are taking, and have been taking since Hackstall's been in charge, a lot of point shots as kind of like the default choice. Don't know where to go. We don't do anything. And Dan, Tom makes the point, they really don't generate a lot or really enough for me, but from behind the net. I'd like to see them play below the circles more in general, but also behind the net. It gives a different shooting angles.
Yeah, and I think that's where somebody like JVR would have really helped out, especially on the power play. And, they don't really have that figure right now. Nolan Patrick has tried a little bit when he's been given the chance, but, I think that's mainly what somebody like JVR would have been for. But, we're not going to see him for another month.
Patrick as well. So, it'll be worth watching. It'll be very compelling to see how this thing plays out, because I think we have a coach who's starting to feel some of the heat. The Flyers got off to a sluggish start. They're playing a desperate team tomorrow night in Florida. I think they're looking, Schiff, I think Florida's still looking for their first win. And they lost Roberto Luongo. And so they're relying on James Reimer, who's a backup's backup, and Michael Hutchinson, who couldn't cut it in Winnipeg.
I'm looking for a blowout. I'm hoping that maybe we can get up around the 4 or 5 goal mark just to give some confidence back to this team. But also, I wanted to touch on one thing. Is it me, or when we're talking about the scoring there, is it me or their set plays? And some of these set plays are so obvious that they're forcing their hand on them. I mean, we're seeing. I've noticed it a lot on the power plays as well. I know it's coming. I know that pass is coming. I know, but I'm still going to make it because that's what that's what the textbook says. I have to make this pass because this is what we practice. And I think that could be contributing instead of taking the man down low, like other teams will do, and then that frees up somebody else in the slot or on the other side of the net. No, we're making this huge cross-ice pass to Giroux or Voracek on a far wall, and to try to do a quick one-timer back to the other side again, you're going, and it's just not working out, and it's so telegraphed every time.
Yeah. There's definitely an element of predictability, and when they brought in the coach from Erie, whose name escapes me, anybody, the power play coach for whatever
Chris
reason.
Knobloch.
There you go.
Chris Knobloch. We were expecting to see some of the some dynamic changes from a younger outlook as they let go of Joey Mullen after years of success. And I see a couple things, but I don't think the players, I think you'd have to change up the mix a little bit more to get a little bit more schematic changes or players that are willing to be more adventurous. Right now, they kind of stay within what they've been doing. So, but gentlemen, just change the focus. Tom, you said you were out there to see Carter Hart in his first game. Is this the one where they versus? This is the one where he got the victory, right?
Yes, his very first professional game.
Right, and it was interesting because he had some equipment problems. He had a quirky bounce off the boards where there was a gaping net that he left open because he didn't read the carom properly. And I'm thinking to myself, I'm so glad that these are the kinds of things that happen in the AHL, like you mentioned earlier, without all that attention on him, and let him go through these ups and downs like he did the following game about 4 or 5 days later versus Springfield, where he got pulled after 4 goals in the first period. And I think it was the first period. And a couple of those goals weren't that good, kind of squeaky.
Definitely. You hit the nail on the head as to why I wanted Carter Hart down in Lehigh Valley to start the season. So his blunders aren't being projected to the entire Philadelphia region. He can figure out the pro game, figure out the speed, figure out the subtleties, what he needs to tweak here and there. And when he's ready, he's ready. And I'm confident that he will be ready sooner than probably I think. I'm probably being conservative on my expectation for Carter Hart for when he comes to Philadelphia. But I'm glad that these kind of mistakes are happening down in, well, I shouldn't say down in Lehigh Valley, down in the minors,
right,
where he can kind of play with the subtleties, figure out, all right, this works, this doesn't. I could do this in junior. I can't do that anymore. But the commonality with Carter Hart from the time he got drafted is that he is a super, super smart and inquisitive goaltender. He studies the game. He realizes what he's got to do and to kind of make up, quote unquote, for his size difference. And there's not a doubt in my mind, Carter Hart will figure it out. It might take him a year. It might take him half the season. But eventually Carter Hart will figure things out.
Yeah, I mean, clearly his strength is positioning and puck tracking. And while that can go askew as you're trying to adjust a whole bunch of other things and the lifestyle of being a professional for the first time in your life, it all comes into play and is going to affect the player. And hopefully these things kind of work themselves out as they mature.
Definitely.
Yeah. One of the other things, Dan, I noticed when they played back-to-back versus the Springfield Thunderbirds, which are the Florida Panthers affiliate, is Phantoms are still dominated for the most part by the key personnel being these veterans that'll never do anything in the NHL. Whereas I'm watching Henrik Borgstrom, who looks like he's real close to NHL ready. And he was the player that was taken right after Rubtsov by the Panthers. And he can be dazzling at times. And when the Flyers are really, with all these prospects, fulfill their potential, it'll be these young kids that are really trying to break through to the roster. And the Flyers aren't quite there yet.
Yeah, the Phantoms are kind of in an interesting transition period right now where a lot of their stars over the past couple of years are all up. Guys like Vorobiev and Sanheim, really the only interesting names they have down there right now are Myers and Hart. Obviously, Rubtsov has looked decent since his start. You got David Cachet who's down there as well, who looks great. But, overall, I think they're in a transition period where the stars got taken and guys like Frost and Farabee aren't quite ready to join them yet, because they're underage. But, I think it's going to be an interesting couple seasons for the Phantoms. And I think that's actually good for somebody like Carter Hart. He's going to get put through the trials and tribulations early, and he's going to learn how to, deal with this adversity that he's obviously going to face when he gets up with the Flyers.
Yeah, no doubt about that. Give credit to David Cachet for a late goal the other night in a comeback effort versus Springfield, who really waxed them the night before, and German Rubtsov with a shootout tally to win the game and complete a comeback. So we'll be watching how the AHL package this year. Maybe I'll actually make it out to the game because of PhillySportsNetwork.com, getting the press box at some point. But, Chef, we are back 29th. But in between then and now, the Flyers are going to play 6 games, starting with tomorrow night at home versus Florida. They travel to Columbus, back home against Jersey and Colorado, at Boston, and then the Islanders before we return. That's 6 games, some tough games in there. That's 12 points. They got to start getting this thing rolling. I'm hoping for at least 7 points.
Yeah, I'm hoping at least 7 or 8 myself. Realistically, they should probably beat the Panthers. They should beat the Blue Jackets. I'm saying they should, but Devils are always tricky. They always seem to have the Flyers number. Avalanche, they should have beat the first time. I'm pissed that they didn't. And the Bruins and the Islanders are mush. Islanders have always been mush for me and the Flyers. So I don't know. I'm hoping for 7. I'm hoping for 8. I'm praying for 7, but I fear it's going to be 5.
All right, you're all over the board there. I'm glad you're not an odds maker. I don't know how to follow that.
No, I don't do that anymore.
Okay.
That's the last job, remember?
yeah, exactly, right. So, but, last thing, Tom, Florida is another one of those desperate teams looking for a win. That situation always scares me. We saw that versus San Jose, and the Flyers are that team the next night in Ottawa.
Definitely, it's something you gotta come out. You gotta come out, and you gotta force the issue immediately. The thing is, with the last 2 home games, the Flyers have come out strong. They've come out strong, and San Jose just the what hit the fan, and it was just nothing that they could do. But with Florida and all these games coming up, they've had relatively decent starts. I mean, you can kind of toss Vegas out of there. The first 10 minutes they were trying to get their legs under them, but the final half of that first period against Vegas, and from then on, they really controlled that game. So if the Flyers can keep that same consistent energy going and driving that play, I can see them getting 8-9 points out of this. Absolutely.
Yeah, they're definitely going to need it. Jersey's surprising people so far. We talked about them on the last show. It's going to have to come from internal growth because they didn't go outside the organization. So that'll be an intriguing game for sure. Colorado, we want revenge. Boston, they're always a tough team, and they've managed to win and build on the fly. So we'll see what happens. Well, Dan, any thoughts from PhillyIsFlyer.com?
Not really. I just hope that, they got pretty rough schedule over the next couple of weeks, and they themselves are kind of all over the board in terms of consistency. So hopefully they got to get their legs under them, and they got to get their legs under them quick. I mean, they're already 2-3, and the way the Metro division is panning out this year, I've been talking about it for a couple of weeks now about this division and how it's going to be. I think it's going to be a lot closer. Maybe you can rule the New York teams out, but I think everybody else is at least going to be pushing for a spot well into the season. So in the way Carolina and New Jersey have started out of the gate, I think things are going to be tight. This is a team that can't afford too many losses early on, and they really got to tighten it down, get through all these injuries, and keep pushing forward.
Yeah, absolutely. Carolina and Florida want to make the playoffs this year. Somebody who made it last year is not going to make it this year. And Chef, any final thoughts?
No, I just think they need to stabilize. They need to. The last couple of games I've seen that everybody seems to be overextending. They're trying to do too much. Just they need to get back to basics. All the small things that help you win games. Stop trying to be like we said about Provorov. Maybe he's overthinking it. I don't think he's overthinking it. I think he's overachieving. I think he's trying to do too much. I think if they just stayed in their wheelhouse, stayed in their comfort zone, I think we'll see a team that starts gelling together and starts winning games. Right.
Well, that's all we can hope for. Tom, you are at sonsofpenn.com. Any final thoughts from you about the Flyers or your website?
The Flyers definitely got to come out of October with a winning record. I don't want to say you can overstate it, but with the expectations going into this season, I think it's huge for the team to get out of October with a winning record. They've definitely got to stabilize. I'm definitely going to be locked into the game tomorrow and seeing if there's any subtle changes. Hopefully Provorov starts looking more like himself tomorrow. That's definitely something I'm going to be keeping an eye out on, and anything that kind of sparks me, I'll be looking to write up on.
Excellent. Thanks so much again for joining us tonight.
Well, thank you for having me.
Yeah, anytime. And just remember, everybody, the Flyers are facing a Florida team that, outside of their goaltenders, has one of the better rosters, especially the forward groups in the whole league. So it should definitely be a good game. Tune in. And with that, we're going to wrap up the OMB Puckcast. We'd like to thank PhillySportsNetwork.com, our partners. And until next time, everybody, take care.